Has the school district told you that they've finally realized they can't meet the needs of your child and that they're looking at private school options? Or do you just have a personal preference and you want your children to go to a religious or other type of private school? Or are you just done with the treatment that your child is getting in the public school? And you can no longer have your child in that situation, and you are ready to look at private school options. Well, if any of these sound familiar to you, you are in the right place, because today we are going to be answering some of the common questions I hear. Like, what's the difference between an IEP and just a service plan? Or how do I get the district to pay for private school? Or you might be wondering, if my child goes to a private school, do they have to follow his IEP? Well, these are some of the questions that we're going to be answering today on our show. So if you are watching us on YouTube right here, I would love for you to let us know where you're watching from. The other thing I wanted to share with you is we will be having show notes available with a variety of different resources that we're going to be talking about today. So if you would like that, just give me a show notes in the comments down below, and I will make sure I give you that link for them. But if you are new to our YouTube channel here and you aren't familiar with me, let me give you a quick introduction. I am Charmaine Tanner. I'm a parent, a retired public school teacher of 30 years. I've also written a #1 book selling on Amazon entitled The Art of Advocacy, a parent's guide to a collaborative IEP process. I host a weekly show here, and my purpose is to make sure that we can share information so you can become an even more effective advocate for your child. I do a lot of one-on-one advocacy for families with their children. I have a monthly membership group, and this weekly show is another way that I can provide service to you. So thanks for joining us on YouTube. I love it. And we are going to continue on learning about private schools and some of the nuances that for sure you want to be familiar with, because it depends on whether or not you can get the school district to pay for the private tuition. It depends on a certain situation, right? So let's dive into. There's actually 3 basic scenarios that we're going to be talking about today with private schools. The first one is when the district says to you, we finally realize we really cannot meet your child's needs, and we need to start looking at some private school options. So in that case, the school would place your child in a private school as part of their IEP. So at the IEP meeting, there would be consensus that a private school would be the placement. And what you need to understand is that the public school remains the responsible party for ensuring that the private school implements the IEP. So this is the only case that we're going to be talking about today where you can know that the IEP will be followed in the private school, but only in the case of the school district has decided private school is the most appropriate option, okay? If you just decide to pull your kids and put them in the private school, that's not necessarily going to happen, right? So you want to make sure that you know kind of these factors and variables that you can weigh out when you're looking at public school options. So in this first scenario also, if the school places your child in the private school as part of their IEP, then that public school district is the one that will be paying the educational costs of the private school. Because the other nice thing about if your school district agrees that your child needs private school placement is that your child is going to retain their rights under the federal IDEA special ed law, and you as a parent will retain your rights also. So this is a huge difference because I see some parents choosing private school and not understanding, one, the IEP doesn't have to be followed. Two, if you are doing it and making that decision on your own, you are going to have to pay the tuition and other costs of the school. And three, only if the school decides private school is an option will you then retain your rights and your child retain your rights. So you have to really consider if you are going to make a decision to have your child go to a religious school or other private school, that you're going to lose your rights under IDEA. And that's like a huge factor that you want to make sure that you always are considering. Now, there's another scenario that we're going to talk about, which is when the parent decides that they want to place their child with disabilities into a private school. So this is called Parentally Placed Private School Children, which means that the parents are the ones that are enrolling them in a religious or other kind of private school or facility. When you do this, your children don't have that same entitlement for services that they would receive in public schools. So that's the other thing that you have to consider, right? If you are making the choice for your child to go to a private school, all of those things that they're used to as far as services and supports in the public school are not going to follow them into the private school. So this is a situation if you choose for your child to attend a religious or other type of private school. If this is the situation and you're placing your child there, your child won't have an IEP, but instead what they'll have is an individualized service plan. Now, this is not as detailed. It does not give your child as many supports and services as an IEP. And I think we know that sometimes it's difficult in the public schools to have the school district implement the IEP with fidelity. I think chances are in many private schools, getting them to implement a service plan can also be challenging. So you have to weigh that out if that's going to be worth it to take your child out of public school, losing your rights, paying for the tuition, and also not getting the services and supports that public schools are mandated to give. So all of those things are things that you want to be considering. Now, the other thing when parents privately place their children is that the local school district does need to spend a proportionate amount of their IDEA funding for services for students in private schools. However, the districts can decide how they spend that money. So some districts are, we think it's just a better use of our money if we provide professional development for the staff at the private school. Some districts, after talking with the private school and the parents, they think, no, we need to actually fund and have a part-time speech language pathologist at the school. So the district gets to decide. There needs to be a meeting for a discussion about that, but they may decide no direct services and instead training for staff. So that's something else that you would want to ask is like how that district money is going to be used. And unfortunately, it's going to be a small amount of money. And there actually is a formula for figuring out how much of their IDEA money must go to kids in private schools. So what the district has to do is figure out how many disabled students are in private schools in their district, compare that to how many other students are in the public schools with disabilities. So this is just an example. If 1.4% of disabled students are in private schools in your district, then your local district has to spend 1.4% of its federal dollars on private students in the private schools. Now, as almost everything, right, there's like these caveats. So it is possible that some parentally placed children with disabilities will not receive any services while others might. So one, it can depend on if the school is going, if the school district is going to use a percentage of their IDEA funds to provide direct services, but it also can be, like that money, that 1.4% is only going to go so far. And then they're not mandated, as far as my advocate understanding of things, they're not mandated to put more money in the pot. So depending on how many students they have to spread that 1.4% out to, it can vary. And some students might get more services than another student. And that, again, is part of the consideration that you need to take if you want to privately or, just through your own, place your child into a private school. So we will carry on here. Now, the other thing I tell parents is to make sure that you don't just think about IDEA and the rights that IDEA gives you, but you can also look at other laws like the Federal Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which means that students can't be discriminated against. Now, what you have to find out is if your child's private or religious school accepts any federal financial assistance, then the school has to follow the Rehab Act, and they cannot exclude your child with a disability. Now, here's the caveat. If the child can, with minor adjustments, be provided an appropriate education by the school. So we know that there's all kinds of, assumptions, definitions, interpretations that are made with what federal laws say. However, we have to be careful because if your child needs more than what they call minor adjustments or kind of standard accommodations in order to be successful, the school isn't obligated to provide those, even if they receive any federal funding. So you want to ask these types of questions of the private school that you're looking at. One, do they accept federal monies? Two, will they accept students that need more than standard accommodations in the school building? So all of that is like something that you really want to make sure you understand ahead of time. So if the private or religious school does not accept any federal funding, then the school has no responsibility to provide accommodations for your child. Now, the third scenario that we're going to talk today about is called unilateral placement. And unilateral placement is the situation when a family has just, tried everything in the public schools. They've gone through lots of the, dispute resolution processes, and there still doesn't seem to be an appropriate place or services or supports for your child in the public school system. And you decide as a parent that you're going to pull your child out and that you are ready, willing, and able to start paying private school tuition. in hopes that you can later come back and get the district to reimburse you for that. So this is a real special situation. And of course, there's like real specific things that you have to do in order to set your situation up that you can later come back and ask for reimbursement of the private school tuition. So let me show you some of the things. One, you need to notify in writing 10 days before you enroll your child in a private school. So notice the language says before you enroll your child. So don't even fill out the enrollment papers. Don't turn in any enrollment papers until it's been 10 days that the district has received notice from you that you're going to be enrolling your child in a private school. Now, the other thing that you have to look at is this is usually based on the fact that you believe that your child isn't receiving a free, appropriate public education. The other thing is, in order to get the district to pay for tuition, you probably are going to have to go through something like the due process hearing in order for that to happen. So you need to know that this is going to be a long process. If you want to have the district reimburse you for the tuition costs of a private school, it's time and energy and money for a due process hearing. If it's appealed to the court. So it can be, 2 to 3 years easily that you're going to have to be responsible for paying that private school tuition before you even get some kind of final decision on whether or not the district is going to reimburse you. So you have to be prepared to financially fund a private school for your child if you're making that decision. So you just need to, be aware of that. The other thing is, in your email to the district, you need to have stated your concerns with the current situation in the public school. You need to reject the proposed placement that is written in the IEP before you remove your child from the public school. So there's real specifics about what you need to include in that email or letter when you're withdrawing your child. There's a timeline that you need to follow. So if you let me know in the comments that you would like a copy of the show notes, I will include a letter template that you can use of what you need to say when, if you're considering withdrawing your child to a private school. So just let me know that in the comments, and I will make sure I come back and provide that for you. The other thing that has to be in your email or letter is that you have to share your intent. So your intent is to enroll your child in a private school at public expense. So you have to give them this heads up, and it has to have all this information in the email. It has to be 10 days before you enroll your child. So these are like super important steps that you must take if you hope to get some reimbursement for that tuition. So today on our YouTube show, we talked about the difference between an IEP and a service plan. The IEP is much more detailed and will provide more services and supports. But if you placed your child in a private school, they won't have an IEP. They will only have a service plan. We also looked at how you can get the district to pay for a private school. You can do that in two ways. One, the district can agree that they can't meet your child's needs and that they agree to a private school placement. The second way is if you unilaterally place your child in private school following all the rules and regs and ask for reimbursement later. That's one way you could do it also. We also talked about, does the private school have to follow your child's IEP? And the answer is no. If you've privately placed them, the private school has no responsibility to follow any IEP. So I hope that you've learned a little bit more about private schools and the options that are available and kind of the plus and negatives of each of those options. The other thing that I'll include in the show notes is there's a wonderful frequently asked question document from the Department of Ed about when parents decide to place their children in private schools. I think there's about 45 different, specific questions about parents doing that. So if you're interested, just type show notes and we will get that to you. And I look forward to seeing you again. We do weekly shows on YouTube. So I'm excited to be here with you today. I am Charmaine Tanner, and as a professional advocate, one of my biggest goals is to help you as a parent become a more effective advocate so your child can be safe, happy, and learning each day by their, beside their friends in school. So until our next YouTube video, I shall see you and take care, and we will be back.